Last year we took you to Swift so that we could show you how a Kon-tiki is built from the chassis up. Today we're at Alco, and this time what we're going to do is show you this cab being turned into the chassis ready to be made into a motorhome. Over the last 12 months we've had the VB suspension and Alco high force systems added to our motorhome as aftermarket options. Right now, if you buy a brand new Kon-tiki, you can tick a box on your order form and they'll be added here at the Alco factory. This cab here is very special because it is the first cab to ever have those added as a factory option.
Did you know that most Fiat-based motorhomes that are built using an Alco chassis leave the factory like this, bolted back to each other? Once Alco receive an order from the motorhome manufacturers to build the base vehicle, and on this occasion this one's for Swift, they then choose the correct cabs for the build and drive them into the factory.
One of Steve's most anticipated things that he was looking forward to see is the way the cabs come in bolted together.
So first up, before splitting the cabs, they go ahead and bolt on a jockey wheel. They do this on either side, so each cab has one jockey wheel. They then wind down the wheel and that takes the weight of the rear.
I love the fact that they use caravan jockey wheels to bolt into place and keep the back of the cab raised.
They can now remove the bolts that are holding the two cabs together. They do this on either side, then the cabs can be split apart without falling over.
In the past, Fiat cabs have arrived at the Alco factory with a Fiat base on, a Fiat chassis on. In more recent times, they've worked together and have this shoe fitted by Fiat so that the Alco system fits easier without having to be chopped off.
Then in comes this special forklift machine that they slide underneath the front cabs, and that lifts them off the ground so they can now manoeuvre the cabs around. Meanwhile, over the other side of the factory, the guys are getting a couple of axles ready to build the rear chassis of the motorhome.
Alco have modified this jig. It's a lift that lifts up and down, and they've put all these giant nuts and bolts here, really accessible, so you don't have to be going backwards and forwards. It's more efficient to have everything ready to go. The first element that's brought to the build are the axles, and they are lifted and dropped into position.
They then lift the long sections of galvanised steel chassis into place. There are two of these running down either side of the chassis.
And this is where we start to see differences between a regular chassis and one that's being created for the VB suspension. This area is where the bags will be mounted.
Watching them build the chassis reminds me of playing with my Meccano set as a little kid. Such good memories. They then put the fixings in place and continue to fit the galvanised steel cross sections on the chassis and bolt them in place.
Now the full support system's in place, it's time to add the bellows which replace traditional springs.
Right here they're feeding the air lines for the VB suspension through the chassis. They then inflate them enough to locate the bottom in place and then continue to inflate them all the way to ensure they're correctly seated.
Next come the wheels.
They fit different wheels to different bills, whatever the customer's ordered, but as this is a Kon-tiki, it gets a nice set of black and silver alloys. Then it only takes a couple of guys to roll the chassis off the build area and across to the other side of the factory. They then manoeuvre it onto the final part of the production line where it will be fixed onto the cab they prepared earlier. Firstly, they jack up the back of the cab and get it to the right height. They then remove the temporary jockey wheel they fitted earlier and lift the lightweight Alco chassis and slide it into place.
On this stage, they're actually connecting the handbrake to the back wheels as well.
It's now the first time we could see it coming together as one long vehicle.
The guys here have now driven the Kon-tiki onto this giant scissor lift. It's lifted the vehicle up, and now what they're doing is connecting the front brake system to the rear hydraulic brakes. In the past, there's been a lot of brake fluid wastage, but now they've got this clever machine. What it does is it pushes the fluid through the brake system, which helps bleed the air out as well. It then collects the fluid, cleans it, recycles it, and it's ready to use again.
They then jump in it again and drive a little further down the production line and onto the next ramp.
The next stage focuses on the wheels, all about wheel tracking and alignment.
Here you'll see further down the production line there are several different vehicles ahead of it.
I thought the Kon-tiki vehicles came in looking really naked because they've got no rear end. These come with no top. That's because this is going to be turned into an A-class style motorhome. The last stop on line one is for an inspection. Dave goes around and checks everything. He checks the bolts, he checks all the connections, he makes sure the torque is set to the right state. Everything is inspected before it moves on.
And once it's passed its thorough inspection, they roll it off the main Alco production line and into an area where they change the manufacturer-fitted front springs with the new VB suspension on the front wheels. It's then shipped to the manufacturer to be built into a brand new motorhome.